So maybe we'll give it. So we'll maybe give folks another couple minutes before we get started. But thanks for those of you who were here right at 2 o'clock. Nicole and I are excited to share our story with you.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if before we get started, if those, we have 3 folks, it looks like, in the room with us. If you wanted to introduce yourself, unmute, whatever you'd like to do. But we will, oh, hi, Mari.
Hi, I'm Mari. I'm from Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and I'm an organic farming apprentice at Grow Johnson County, which is a nonprofit farm just outside of Iowa City, Iowa, that specializes in charitable food production. So everything we grow is donated to local food banks and other organizations that serve people who are living under food apartheid.
Thank you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Micah or Chloe? Thank you, Chloe. Looks like you're farming organic produce in Denver. Wow. That's the fun of these national conferences, isn't it? Just the people. And Beth, we're waiting just a few minutes to give a few more folks the time to join. But if you want to just introduce yourself briefly, that'd be great.
Hi, I'm Beth Nelson. I'm in St. Paul, Minnesota. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the regional coordinator for a USDA grant program, Sustainable Ag Research and Education.
Great, thank you. Please, anyone else joining? We're just doing a real quick introduction while we're giving folks a few more minutes to join us.
Hi, I'm Mika. I'm in Denver, Colorado, she, her. I'm an intern with Go Farm, a community outreach and local food ship program.
And Mika? You pronounce it Mika, great. Hi. Kate.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kate Anstreicher. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a program manager at the Glynwood Center for Regional Food and Farming. I mostly work on our farmer training program and our regional food programs, but also of note, I'm an Iowa native, and so have special love for the Midwestern origins, at least, of WFAN, and have a very close friend who was on the board before accepting a Fulbright position in Spain. So.
Great. Okay, well, I think probably we want to get started. Nicole and I have got a lot of material, and so we want to be sure we can have the kind of discussion that we imagined, and so we want to take most of that time to do it. At any rate, I'm Laura Lengnick. I'm the very new Director of Agriculture at the Glennwood Center for Regional Food and Farming. I've been here about a month, so this is all very new to me. But I'm very excited I've enjoyed working with Nicole, and you'll learn more about who Nicole is in just a minute. I've asked her to introduce herself, but I've been working with Nicole over the last month to understand the farm here a little bit better, and in particular her role and her work and her ambition and vision for our livestock farm here. We have got Nicole and I talked about how we wanted to do this, and we just felt that the way to go for us that felt the best was let's just have a conversation. So we do have some information prepared for you, and but we want to use that information in the way that, in a conversation that is shaped by everyone. So that's what we've got ready for you. I've developed a little bit of information that will give, if you're interested, introduce a snapshot of Hudson Valley pastured protein. What does it look like in the Hudson Valley to produce pasture-based livestock? That is the results of some research that was released in 2017, but with in a collaboration between Glennwood and the local economies project. We're ready to tell you more about Glennwood if you're interested in learning more about our programs and our organization. Where we want to start is, I'm going to hand it off to Nicole in just a minute, and she's going to do a deep dive into our livestock program here at Glennwood at our farm. We're located in Cold Spring, New York. And then if we still got the energy, the time, and the interest, Nicole and I are really interested to find out, to share what we think about what it means to be regenerative and resilient, and also to hear what you think about what that means. So I think at this point, Nicole, if you're ready, I'll hand it off to you, and please introduce yourself and take it away. And I'll be here. I will monitor the chat. Please put, I think with this size, you really could raise your hand. If you have clarifying questions, maybe raise your hand. Is that okay with you, Nicole? We didn't talk about this part ahead of time, but just let people break in.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Yeah, I love it. Yeah.
And if it's not clarifying, but more sort of a more thoughtful question or something that really needs some discussion, maybe put it in the chat, and we'll make every effort to get to it in the last part of the session. Okay, so with that, take it away, Nicole.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. So my name is Nicole Scott. I'm the livestock manager here at the Glynwood Center in Cold Spring, New York, in the Mid-Hudson Valley region. So I've been the livestock manager for the past 2 seasons, but I first came to Glynwood as an apprentice back in 2017 after studying animal science in college. And so after a year abroad, I came back to be an assistant manager to change systems and to really improve our apprenticeship offering and our farming practices. So that's what we're going to get into today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Alrighty. So first, I just wanted to start off with, who we are. So Glynwood, right? So here at Glynwood, our mission is to ensure the Hudson Valley is a region defined by food and farming, and really we do that through 4 different programmatic areas. So I'm on the farm. I'm within the farmer training program, but we also work with folks throughout the region by empowering change makers. We create coalitions with other food producers, and we have a new program called Local Food for Every Table that was really developed out of the COVID-19 pandemic, really to be able to connect deeper with our local community and be able to provide the food that's needed to local donation partners. So within the farmer training program, on Glynwood proper, we offer an apprenticeship program, year-long program, both on our livestock side and veg side of the operation. So apprentices come for about 10 months of the year on livestock, really to get familiar with raising all the different species that we have, get an understanding of what it takes to raise animals in a diversified operation, and then and get an understanding of what it takes to manage a small scale livestock operation. So will be gaining business skills and managerial skills alongside the more animal husbandry, skills. So Our program has started back in 2008, and it's been really successful. I'm one of the graduates, but a lot of us are still in the food and farming sector, which is is really exciting, and I think attests to the to the quality of our program and to the quality of our alumni network. So let's dive right into the farm. So at Glynwood, the livestock operation is a diversified pasture-based operation. We raise cattle, sheep, pigs, meat chickens, and turkeys. And in the next few seasons, we'll be actually expanding that. And our operation has also been certified animal welfare approved for the past 12 years. That's really focused in our management style, where really animal welfare is at the top of our mind and everything that we do here. So I'll also say we market our products all through an on-site farm store, which is sort of an added, has been a real asset to be able to have folks from our community come onto the farm. They drive in, they see all the animals that we're raising, they see how we are managing them on pasture, and then they're able to come to our store, see the product, and speak with people that are raising their meat. So wanted to start off with a little little piece of history. So the land that we're farming on is unceded Lenape territory within the lower New York region. Glynwood has, for the past 12 years, Glynwood's been practicing, I'd say, rotational grazing management of our ruminants and of our pigs and chickens. So while that's been a change from years past, where originally this land was managed in terms of hay fields and then feed for a small dairy operation, we've transitioned to raising different classes of livestock and work to manage the farm landscape through different types of animals. So here, just a couple photos of our sheep. We have a small apple orchard on the site. It's actually quite old, and so nowadays it's mostly just used as used for photos, but really used as a small pasture that we graze our small ruminants on. And then I also wanted to show everyone sort of how we rotate our poultry on pasture. So during the summer season, we raise about 800 meat chickens on pasture. This season, we got some really fancy new chicken coops that I'm in love with. So those are off to the left. And so right now, we are raising our chickens within these enclosed structures, just because we have a lot of aerial predation here. But also, I forgot to mention that Glynwood is also really unique for this region, just because we are basically like an oasis in a state park. So really, we're surrounded by woodlands, and so we end up having to learn how to live with hawks, coyotes, foxes, all the predators that you can think of. So our solution to this has been to protect our chickens is to move to this more enclosed chicken tractor style management. But then on the right side, you'll see how we're raising our turkeys. So our turkeys, they start off in a small, in a closed coop, just as, they're still figuring out how to graze and figuring out how to be turkeys. If anyone on here has raised turkeys, you'll know that they're not the smartest when they start off as poults. They're not as quick as chickens, but once they kind of reach this like teenage stage, we move them to this open style coop where they have lots of roosts and just a lot of room to free range and search for bugs in our pastures. All right, and so I was saying that over the past few years, we've been practicing like rotational grazing, which has worked for us to a certain extent. But as I came back to be a manager and to lead the program, I really wanted to step things up and to actually start to use regenerative principles on our property. So while rotational grazing does allow for improvements in soil health, we are managing the grass quite well to be able to feed our animals all season long. We still deal with issues such as compaction and poor soil drainage through a lot of our pastures, and after sort of 10 to 12 years of one type of land management, I'm looking to move into the future and work towards becoming a regenerative operation. So over the past couple of seasons, we've taken a few steps towards that. You'll see here, we have a flock of lambs grazing a cover crop mix that's planted in one of our veg fields that'll be fallow for this season. And you'll also see to the right, one of our accidental bulls. He's supposed to be a steer, but he's grazing another field that we planted into a different type of cover crop mix. So so this is like quite new for us. The sheep, so in past years, our livestock and veg operations have been quite separate as we developed our operations and grew and sort of found the market for our products. But this past season, we're starting to work closer together to really integrate both operations and help improve soil health within our veg fields, but also help to finish our lambs. So they're on a field pea and rye mix, I believe, and they absolutely love it. It's beautiful to see them out there grazing, and they actually do gain quite a bit of weight when they transition to this from our perennial pastures. And so this past summer, we had our steers on a sorghum Sudan grass mix on one of our fields that we're working really to rejuvenate. You'll see in the lower half, one of my colleagues, Matthew Ball, is starting this process of converting one of our pastures from its perennial mix that it's been in for decades, and getting ready to plant this sorghum Sudan grass. So this field that our steers were on is one of our biggest problem fields, and this was the red flag that really sort of forced me to grapple with the fact that I would not say that we're quite regenerative yet, but we need to start incorporating some of these principles in our practice. So this field has really poor drainage towards the end of the season. Just about now, when we start to get heavy rains, we end up with standing water in certain parts of it. So where we devised a plan so not only do we have drainage issues, but due to how much water ends up standing in this field, we've started to notice different plant species start to thrive. So we have a lot of sedges that grow in this field that isn't palatable to any of our animals. And other water-loving species are growing and outcompeting the perennial grasses. So we decided to take a look at this field, and our plan was to keyline to be able to allow the water to go somewhere, and then plant the field into 2 different types of cover crop mixes to deal with the weeds and sort of unwanted grasses that were coming up. So that was this season. This field is currently in another cover crop mix, and will be for the winter. And then next spring, we're going to be planting it back into a perennial mix and sort of we'll examine and see if we've put a dent in that in the drainage issues, in the compaction issues that we were seeing, and also are hoping that we've killed the cycle of some of the weed species that we were seeing coming up. And so with all this work that we plan to do for this season and for the future, we decided to apply for the Certified Regenerative Pilot Program through A Greener World. So they're the folks that certify us to be animal welfare approved. And so they are offering this new certification this season, and which I felt like perfect timing, because as a team, we were having these discussions about what we can do to really step up our management game. And A Greener World launched this, and it's a program that where we're working with colleagues to create a 10-year management plan of your property that is really all-encompassing. So not only are you coming up with production plans and grazing plans, but also a nutrient management plan, pest management plans, and you're also taking a look at your labor, like other inputs such as labor, and how much fossil fuel you're using, and really trying to understand what your impact is on the parcel of land that you're managing. So this is something that while we've been thinking about these practices and principles, by going through this program, it allows for us to sit down, write out a plan and an outline for what we're going to be doing, and to begin really tracking our journey towards becoming a more regenerative operation. Yep, and so with that generation, we move into resiliency, and I'll start with, I wanted to include a really current photo of our pigs. So over these past few years as being a manager, I've really seen a lot of change within our small microclimate here. And this fall, we had a series of hurricanes that actually hit New York. And this is just from one of those days. And I just wanted to illustrate how much water we are dealing with on our property, and how it's creating these small rivers and changing the landscape as we are working to farm it. And so there's really just a daily reminder of the change that we need to make and how we need to adapt to this new climate here. And so I find a big piece of this regenerative and resiliency talk is really comes down to people and like who are the folks that are raising these animals on pasture and working to steward this land. And so I started off talking about our apprenticeship program. And so, and apprentices really are the heart of the farm here. Folks are coming, spending a year, and we're becoming a part of their farming journey. And so in recent years, we've worked to really take a look at our apprentice offerings in terms of workshops, but also sort of work-life balance and also like a salary and benefits. And so to me, this is, what we do here is more than just raise animals on pasture, is more than monitor our grass. It's really it's really not only just about the animals, but about my team as well. So just wanted to I'll kind of conclude with that. I know Laura, we were going to talk a little bit about talk about a definition of regenerative and move into a discussion about that. And I just wanted to give you the floor.
That's awesome. What a beautiful picture there. Is that Aria?
Yep, that's Aria's. Yeah, this past season we just got a couple of livestock guardian dogs, and this dog, she's 2 years old and still teaching her boundaries, but it's hard to say no to these dogs.
Yeah. So I wonder, anybody have any questions or want to engage with what you've seen so far about our farm?
Can you tell me a little bit more about how the certified regenerative differs from, say, certified organic, and what really led you to go for that certification? And was there any costs involved, or would there be costs involved for most farmers to get in that?
Yeah, good question. So our livestock operation is not certified organic. We use organic practices, and we feed non-GMO grain to our pigs and chickens and turkeys. But I went with the certified regenerative program versus going down the organic path because to me it felt like it was, I guess, more aligned with our values, because it's thinking about our management practices like that, like larger than the land itself. It's incorporating how we interact with the community, how we're working to protect air, soil, water. It felt much larger certification to me, and a more it felt like it would be a better effort to go towards that versus just organic certification. And so since it's a pilot program, it was free for us, and so but there will end up being a charge for farmers joining the program, but there are ways to subsidize the fees associated with going for these certifications.
So if I could break into or join this conversation, one of the things I noticed in talking with Nicole, because I was curious about that too, why this particular regenerative certification program. And Nicole, I don't think you just mentioned it, but it seemed to me it was also important that it be within this bigger frame of animal welfare. Is that fair to say that that was
Yeah.
part of it as well?
Yeah. So since we've been certified animal welfare approved for over 10 years, and so we've as we make our production plans, we are always using those guidelines and recommendations as our framework. It was with our auditor offering this, and as we met as different producers and learned more about what they were thinking, you could still see that they were just building upon the animal welfare approved program that we're already a part of, which is really exciting, because not all certifications around regenerative or organic have such high welfare standards. And so, Laura's correct. It was, it felt like it was the right next step for us.
Yeah, it made a lot of sense
mm-hmm.
for this farm.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Or could you stop sharing and that way we can see everyone?
Yes.
Great, thanks. Any other questions for Nicole? Just more specific kind of farming questions.
A little bit. I can listen, maybe. See, listen, I'm listening. Oh, I'm not crazy. There's something late.
Hey, Liz, thank you. Does somebody have a question? Okay. So yeah, if we don't have any more questions about the specific practices or anything about the farm, what are your questions? What are your comments? What do you want to dive into here? I'm curious. We would like you to shape this meeting that we're having, this time we have together. Why did you come to this session? What did you want to learn more about? And I should warn you, I'm really comfortable with silence on a Zoom meeting, so we can just enjoy the silence if you like.
Yes, well, Laura and Nicole, it won't surprise you to know that I'm interested in knowing how we measure we're making progress in being resilient. What can we be looking at? We know some of the common things, but are there things we haven't thought about that you are, I don't know, measuring or keeping an eye on?
Okay, you want to go that way? I can share my screen, and I've got a few slides related to that. We could just talk about it, but I think I think to answer your question generally, yes, there are things we can measure, and resilience is not this poorly defined idea or an idea that anyone can sort of take and shape and make their own. There's actually a really strong 50-year-old science basis for the ideas around resilience. And so what I have prepared, if it would be helpful, is to just walk you through a real brief version of that history, so that one of the things that I know in my own work is that people tend to use resilience concepts from the wrong science, because it turns out that resilience has been developed in 4 different disciplines. They have different, and some of them are great for farming, and some of them really don't work for farming. So would that be of interest to y'all to learn a little bit more about that? And one of the thrusts of my work for the last decade has been exactly to your question. How do we measure progress towards resilience? How do we know what we're doing is actually getting us where we want to be? So I'm seeing a couple of nodding heads, so I'm going to go ahead and be bold. And let's see. Yeah. I'll share my screen and we'll do a little more teaching. Yeah, there it is. So Nicole, can you monitor chat this time? Although again, we're a pretty small group, so please feel free to break in if you have a question. So I think a good place to start a discussion of regenerative and resilient is Nicole mentioned that we had a definition. I think maybe at this point I ought to say this is a definition that I'm bringing to the organization and working hard to find a way to integrate this particular definition into the work here at Glennwood. But Nicole and I did talk about this before we did this presentation, and Nicole, jump in here, but I think you're pretty comfortable. You like this definition, is that right?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, it's, I guess originally when, back when I was really thinking about the certified regenerative program and just starting to use the term regenerative, it felt like we were mostly talking about carbon sequestration. And while that is an important piece of this, it's a much greater concept than that. So yeah, when Laura brought up this definition, I really connected with it.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks. Yeah, and so this definition was just let's take a step back. From my perspective, now you need to understand I've been working in sustainable agriculture for 30 years, and I'm proud of that. This gray hair, I come by it honestly. I've been doing this work for a long time. And so then this word regenerative started popping up, and unfortunately, associated with this word regenerative in some circles was a lot of dismissal of sustainable agriculture. And I'm sure you've probably already all heard something along the lines of sustainable agriculture. Regenerative is sustainable agriculture plus. In other words, somehow it's better than sustainable agriculture. And if there's interest, we could go into why that is and how that happened. But what I really want to focus on with that little bit of context is just to say that right now, the world of regenerative, the definitions are all over the place. And I think it's unfortunate because it's such a feel-good word that when we talk about regenerative, I think we all think we mean the same thing. But if you actually look at what people are presenting, if you get beyond the headlines and start looking at what people are presenting and promoting as regenerative, it's very, very different. And there are lots of different visions out there. And I would put that sort of universe of possibilities around regenerative at the most simplest is a clear and very obvious appropriation of the NRCS keys to soil health. Those are those 4 keys to soil health. They've been around for 20 years. They have been rebranded by some as regenerative agriculture. That's cover crops, keeping roots in the ground. What are they? Help me, Nicole. You know those 4 keys. Keeping roots in the ground. Yeah, sorry, I'm not prepared to actually talk about that. It's a very specific and limited. It's just 4 steps, and that's kind of one end of the regenerative ag spectrum. And then at the other end, there's some pretty, I think, interesting versions of regenerative that actually look at kind of create this evolutionary timeline. It's pretty intense. And that's at the other end. And then we've got all this stuff going on in the middle. So that's a long-winded way of saying that when I looked out at this regenerative ag space, the definition that struck me as the most resilient, as the most well-aligned with resilience science is this one. And it doesn't surprise me, because this definition was advanced by the Regenerative Ag Alliance, and it was created through a really strong collaboration that included a lot of indigenous voices. And it doesn't surprise me that that's why this definition is best aligned with resilience thinking, because the indigenous worldview, that way of thinking about how people, land, and community can thrive together, that's a very resilient, that really is well aligned with the ideas of resilience. So this definition, I'll just walk through it, and please break in. We want this to be a discussion. Nicole and I really wanted this to be a discussion. So as much as you're comfortable and willing, come on into this discussion. But I'll just want to walk through this definition just a little bit, and then I'll talk a little bit more about how you measure progress towards the goal of resilience. So what I really liked about this definition, you can tell because I bolded the words, right? We're using an ecological blueprint. So the design of a regenerative agriculture system takes into account both the opportunities and the limitations of the ecological place. So the local ecosystem, the native patterns of the way land, people, and community, and in community, when I think about this and use that term, land, people, community, I can think of animals and plants as people, or I can put it in community, whatever you're most comfortable with. But I am including all the living beings when I say land, people, and community. So this particular definition, this way of thinking about regenerative ag, is designing food and farming systems for the local regional ecology, and we're thinking about restoring the ecology of a region, but in particular, and there's all these benefits, all the benefits in that second bullet: soil health, carbon sequestration, improved water cycle. All that's great, all that's important, and I'm all for all of that. But it's to the purpose of supporting the regeneration of ecological, social, economic, and spiritual conditions in a region. That's the piece that I think is so important, and that's the piece that I think is missing from a lot of the regenerative agriculture conversation today. So that gives you a little more sense of where Nicole and I are going in our own thinking about what regeneration is. Any thoughts, questions, pushback? Love pushback.
So I'm going to play devil's advocate. I'm writing a grant, say, to Beth Nelson and her group, and I want to say that we are supporting, mentorships, for example, that support regenerative agriculture. We use this definition, and then Beth says to me, well, how are you going to measure the spiritual regeneration of a region? So that I'm just, is this the question, how do we measure it? Or is the question, we don't, it's kind of that, or that it's not we need to rethink and decolonize our metrics, as a book I recently read.
Well, I love that question. That's a great question. That's actually where I live in all of this, because I love to make that connection between these big picture ideas and then practical ways to I call it leaning into them in our work, and so that we can really see that what we're doing, we're holding ourselves accountable. I view that kind of measurement as holding ourselves accountable to these really ambitious goals, right? So here's the really cool thing. Resilience thinking has already figured out all the metrics. And so why don't we go there, and we can do that. So we're going to go past that bit. And I'm just going to go right here. So So remember I mentioned a little earlier that there's actually 4 different disciplines that over the last 50 or so years, sometimes a little bit longer, have really developed the science of resilience for their own disciplines. And this is great because we have a lot there's a knowledge base out there that's very scientific in nature, and we can draw from it in our own efforts in agriculture and food to enhance resilience. And I've already told you also that these are also very well aligned with regeneration as well. So we're getting 2 for 1. We can use this science base to actually measure regeneration and measure resilience. Okay, so pretty quickly, I just want to share a little bit about the type of resilience that has been developed in each of these, and you'll see in a minute why it's important. So the oldest, and I think most commonly applied resilience science comes out of engineering. And it's such a poor source of resilience thinking. Here's why. Because engineering resilience was developed in order to design systems to withstand known extremes. So, for example, a bridge has to withstand a certain wind speed, or a building has to withstand a certain flood level. Everybody with me on that? Here's why it's such a poor choice in these times. One thing we know about climate change is we cannot predict the extremes that we know they're going to get more extreme. We're already seeing incredible extremes, way beyond anything that way beyond anything we've seen in the past. So how can you use a type of resilience thinking that assumes you can predict extremes and design to them is very poorly suited for our needs in these times. And one key I have to knowing when someone's dipping into engineering resilience in their thinking is when they say we're going to build resilience. And now that I've said that, you're going to see it everywhere all the time. And isn't that unfortunate? Because we don't build resilience. We certainly don't build it in farming systems. We cultivate it. It's an idea. It's about creating relationships and the individuals in those relationships and nurturing them and cultivating their ability to interact in mutually beneficial ways. It's much more of a cultivating. It's not a building. So I'll stop there, but that's engineering resilience. Very useful when you can predict the extremes you need to design for. Next kind of resilience is psychological resilience. A whole lot here that we can certainly use in food and farming systems in regeneration. And to specifically answer your question, I think it was it Jules that asked that question about how do you measure spiritual regeneration? Boom, go into psychological resilience, all kinds of good metrics, excellent science. We know a lot about the importance of having a spiritual life, how that affects health, how that affects resilience. There's really a lot there. And I think that's where you might want to go to look for metrics. Then there's a third kind of resilience. It's basically disaster risk management. So psychological resilience is great, but it's not enough when you're dealing with people managing landscapes. It's not enough. We need more. We need some piece of the land in there. So the third type is disaster management. This is another type of resilience thinking that I'm seeing applied a lot, and it is totally inappropriate for use when we're trying to manage long-term the critical systems we depend on to survive. It's excellent body of knowledge when what you're trying to do is manage an acute disruption, a shock. We do need to understand what we need to do. We need planning. We need the ability to recover quickly from a shock. but it can't be the only way we're thinking about resilience. So we come to the last type of resilience, and you're probably figuring out by now, maybe there's something good for us here in ecology. And in fact, that's exactly right. The idea of there's a type of resilience thinking called social ecological resilience thinking. And it has been developed in ecology. It's a subspecialty within ecology, and it focuses on environments, natural environments dominated by humans. Bingo. Isn't that what a farm is? Isn't that what our communities are? It's what our food system is, right? So everything else I might say today about resilience is coming out of this social ecological resilience. It's the appropriate body of scientific knowledge for us to draw on as we develop these ideas of both regeneration and resilience. Any thoughts, questions about that before I go on? Okay, so the last thing I want to say is that I've been studying seriously as a scientist, studying resilience for theory for about a decade. And so I want to give you a hint about this. If you want to get deeper, if you want to go below the headlines with resilience thinking, be warned. We have these 4 different types of science in play. There are a lot of people out there using that word resilience and drawing on these 4 sciences. And I think very often they don't understand that there are these differences. And what was really tricky for me 10 years ago, as I just started to get into learning more about this, is that unfortunately, these 4 different types of resilient science sometimes use the same word to mean different things. And sometimes, what's the opposite of that? The same word means different things. Different words mean the same thing. So it's tricky getting into it, but I have a solution for all of those in food and farming, and I'll show you that in a minute. You can avoid all that tripping up and stumbling that I did earlier on when I was first getting into this. Okay, so let's get into this metrics question. And I've got I gave you the reference below if you're the type that likes to go read a little bit of research or the research paper. I suggest this paper, an indicator framework. Jules, is that sounding like metrics to you? An indicator framework? Yep.
More importantly, is it sounding like metrics to Beth? I'm just kidding.
Okay. Beth, is that sounding like metrics to you? Yeah, so that's why that really helped me. I share this paper for 2 reasons. One, because I think this was when I was in that period of trying to like figure out what the heck this was. I hit this paper, and it was one of those aha. It's one of those aha moments for me when I was learning. And so I share it. I also think it's actually well written. It's very well written. It's pretty easy to read. Anybody can kind of get into it and read it. So that's just one example. That's a great example if you want to get started. I recommend that paper. And I'm not going to run through all these, but what I want you to see is that we actually do have a nice list of resilient agroecosystem behaviors. So there's a lot there, but why don't we, let's go to I'll just give an example from the ecological side, something that we know already about in both regenerative ag and also sustainable ag. So look at that next to last bullet, coupled with local natural capital. Sort of weird language, but really all that means is that we are designing our food and farming systems to connect with local ecosystems, which we already discussed in the regenerative, right? And so if you go deeper into this paper, what you'll see is that there are examples of how to measure that. So let's move over to the social side. And where might we find something about spirituality? Because that was the specific question Jules had. How the heck are we measuring regenerating or restoring spirituality? And I think the best place that you could begin to think about that is it's like the fifth bullet down, that reflective and shared learning. Reflective and shared learning. That's learning in community. It turns out that humans really learn well that way. It's kind of our natural mode, and you can imagine. So reflective learning just means that in a group you step back and reflect on what you've learned. And shared learning means that you're doing new learning with other people. And I think as I described that, you can all imagine a time in your life when you just had the best time because you were with people. Maybe you were learning by doing in a group, and just that sense of excitement and agency that comes with being with other people while you're learning. Is that squaring with folks? Do you get that? The piece that we've kind of lost in our culture is that reflective piece, taking the time to really reflect on what we've learned. But I think I'm not, Jules, I'd really love to actually work directly with you to help you find some metrics. But I think you could begin looking for them in that part of resilience, that kind of resilience behavior. And I'm not saying this is complete done. There's no more work to be done in figuring out resilient behaviors in agroecosystems, but it's a good start. It's a first start. I mean, this paper is now almost 10 years old, and there's been a lot of development since then. Okay? Any other thoughts, questions about these behaviors? Is anybody noticing behaviors and thinking that's sort of a weird way to describe this? Or does that make sense to everybody? Yeah. It was weird to me at first, but I came to really appreciate that way of describing the characteristics of a farming system, because it really leans into this idea that what we're doing is cultivating relationships. It's relationships that we're really focused on, and that's true for regenerative systems, sustainable systems. It's about the relationships. And as farmers, we have a lot of agency. We place different species in proximity to other species across a landscape, and then we manage them in ways that can promote healthy relationships or create barriers to healthy relationships. So I've really come to appreciate that word, behaviors. We're going to go on.
So Laura, can I ask?
Yep.
I just wanted to ask you about that. I was just thinking about the honors legacy one, as we're kind of also talking about how we want to be more inclusive. I mean, I can see how in one way that's great, but in another way, if you're kind of the dominant system and you're honoring your legacy, you're resistant to change, and that may not always be a good thing. So I'm looking at the paper was written in 2012. There's a lot that's happened since then. I hope we're doing more. So I was just kind of thinking about that from kind of my, privilege perspective, that maybe honoring legacy isn't always the best. So
yeah, so that paper goes into detail about this. That's a great question. It is much more than honoring. It's a long view. It's a long view of honoring legacy, and it's about much more than just human interactions. It's also about ecological legacy. So while I think an unsophisticated application of that idea might lead to what you're describing, it would not be a resilient application of that idea. And I think probably true for any of these. You can, how these ideas are promoted and applied will affect the outcome of any of them, really. But thank you. That's a great question. For these times, that's a great question to wonder about that. So if that set of indicators looked a little daunting, here's my tiny little soft plug of my book. I've got I wrote a book. It came out in 2015. It sold out, and I've got a new edition coming out, and it's much better. It's a much better edition coming out in May in 22. And one of the things I've done to try to really create practical tools, something that a farmer or a rancher or really anybody that's thinking about a regional planner, anybody that's thinking about how do we design our systems, our community systems, our landscape systems to promote resilience. And I'm pretty comfortable. I've been using these 3 rules for about 5 years now, and in lots of different applications, and it's working pretty well. That we can kind of take that big list of indicators and keep these 3 rules in mind. You know, these aren't harsh, hard rules. These are rules of thumb as we're thinking about how we design and manage farm and food systems. And the first is that we want to organize and design. We want to design and manage systems to promote diverse relationships of mutual benefit. There's a lot in there, but you can read more about it in the new book. And I think it's been working pretty well for me as a rule of thumb. The second is that we want to make decisions that's promoting regional self-reliance. So we're not having to import a lot of energy and materials into our region in order to accomplish the goals we have with our farming and food systems. And we don't want to be exporting a lot of materials, energy, and waste from our system, from our region, in order to accomplish our goals. So that's the second rule. The third rule is we want to make designs and decisions that actually help us accumulate community-based wealth. And that's wealth held in common in some way. Again, each one of those things, there's a lot behind those bullets, but I just want to share that I think that I've created a fairly straightforward but set of rules, but they have a lot of integrity in terms of just guiding kind of rules of thumb of design and management. And I think I just want to go, I think we're just going to go here because I want to give Nicole a chance to get back in here, and also if there's any other discussions any other place you'd like to go. The other thing, so I pulled some of these slides from other presentations, so don't let the climate risk part of this concern you. But just in terms of thinking of resilience, we're beginning to have a good set of resources, practical resources for farmers to begin to apply these ideas of resilience to their operations. And in this, and a lot of this is coming out in the context of climate change and increasing risks that are complicating the management of farming operations. But all of the resilience science is actually can be much more broadly applied. Climate risk creates disruptions and shocks, and that's what resilience science helps us figure out how to avoid. How to avoid damage from disruptions and shocks, how to design and manage systems that can respond to disruptions and shocks in ways that reduce damage, avoid or reduce damage. And also, resilience science can help us think about how to design and manage and transform manage systems to evolve over time as conditions change. And those are any kinds of shocks or disturbances resilience science can be applied to any kinds of shocks and disturbances, like the market shocks we just have seen in the last 2 years with the pandemic. So don't So all of these resources are really useful to begin thinking about managing resilience, not just for climate risk. Sorry that I'm getting tired. I mean, I'm getting in my tired part of the afternoon. And most of these resources are free. You can find them online. I know we have a few SARE folks on, so I'll just say very proudly, including that SARE bulletin down there. That's a great way to get started thinking about it. And then again, my book will be coming out in 22 and it takes a deep dive. And a nice thing, the SARE bulletin and, well, actually the adaptations resources bulletin and also the Resilient Ag, the book, all include pretty detailed case studies. So you can hear from farmers about how they are applying these ideas. Not that they always understood they were resilient practices, or regenerative practices, but they understood that they were helping sustain their farm through more variable weather and changing weather patterns. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing there and just check in. How are folks doing? We've got about a half hour left.
Thanks. Appreciating it all so far.
Good.
And
Good.
I'm just jumped in kind of last minute and during a lunch break, not knowing what workshop I was going to snag, but really glad I caught this one.
Well, thanks, Liz.
Thank you.
Yep. If there's no burning questions or comments, the other piece that we said we would present, and I'm prepared to do that if you're interested, is we've done some, Glennwood, I shouldn't say we, I had nothing to do with it, but Glennwood recently with the Local Economies Project did a sort of a landscape analysis of pastured protein producers in the Hudson Valley, and I don't have a lot related to that, but if you're interested to kind of get a sense of where we are in this part of the country with pasture protein, what that looks like, that industry looks like in our part of the country, and then some of the challenges that have been identified by pastured protein producers, I can do that too. Any thoughts? You want to add anything at this point, Nicole?
No, I think, I'm thinking, maybe we should dive into the, sort of perspective on pastured protein producers in the region, just to, give that perspective.
Kind of that context for your own farm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Actually, I remembered when Nicole was presenting, I was sort of looking for listening for examples of how she is using resilience practices. And again, all the work that I've done with farmers, very often they would never use that word. And the thing I noticed I listened to Nicole telling her story of this farm, and one thing that she kept saying over, and I wonder if anyone else noticed it, over and over again, what I heard her saying was, I'm looking at this. I noticed that. She's really observant. She is out there engaged with the land and the animals. And she mentioned she was noticing soil changes. She mentioned plant community changes. I mean, this level of sophisticated listening to the land is one way I think about it. Or I don't know. How do you think about that? I'll just finish because she went through several examples. So she was noticing soil health changes. I didn't tell her I was going to do this, so she's probably feeling a little uncomfortable, but it's okay. It's all good. She talked about in that one wet pasture, or the wet pasture, she was noticing in the wet areas that the plant community was changing and that was affecting forage quality. And she had that great picture of poor pigs of all the water in but more generally, what I heard she was doing was was thinking about how water moves across our land and doing that in a really sophisticated way as well. And then the last piece I heard that really was showed some pretty sophisticated resilience thinking was that she is making changes and then planning to go and observe how the changes she's making is affecting those different aspects of the system. So I think that's a great example. You know, I really appreciate Nicole's her willingness to say we're not regenerative yet. You know, her humbleness around what we're trying to do here. At the same time, I feel pretty certain we're going to get there because of those kinds of behaviors in our farmer, or we have a better chance of getting there because of her interest and ability, and already she's really observing the landscape really closely in those relationships. So there you go. Sorry, I didn't plan on doing that either, Nicole. But
well, yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, no, that's. Yeah, I have to say, yeah, when I first kind of came into this role, I would not have called any of this thinking resilient thinking or resilient management. It's, I guess, even before I came into farming, I've always wanted to have a close relationship with the land, and really was shocked and disturbed about by how, you know, we as a society, how we've sort of, how we treat land and how we abuse it. And so when I was, you know, starting my farming journey, I always take the time to, you sort of learn the land you're on and understand the different plant communities, the various wildlife, the insects that are here. And I feel it's quite important as a farmer to understand how to live and work with the land as it was and what was here before you. And so it's great to be able to sort of put language to how I believe the best way to manage land is. It's really it's listening to the land, and you know, you can change how you're managing a property, but it's also very important to really assess or to look back and to assess sort of what you've done, and be honest with yourself and see if if you're really doing the right thing, moving in the right direction. So I think that's a different way of thinking, but I think that's the way that Glynwood will be moving forward, and I think it's going to bring some great change to this region.
Thanks. Yeah. Okay, we'll do a little bit of research. We'll finish up giving you sort of a little bit of a context for the story that Nicole has shared about our farm. Let's see, where is it? Here it is. Oh, sorry, folks. I know this is hard to watch. There it is. So, Nicole, please jump in here. I wasn't here when this very excellent report was done. This research was done. I mean, I'm happy to talk about it, but please jump in if I'm getting something wrong, if that's okay with you. Mm-hmm. But at any rate, a few years back, Glenwood partnered with the Local Economies Project to just do a snapshot, kind of a landscape analysis is the way I think about it, of pastured protein production in the Hudson Valley. And this was released in at the end of 2017, so it's fairly current. And some of the high-level findings of this work, they found that most of the pasture protein producers were small scale, family owned and operated. So they didn't hire they weren't hiring any labor in. It was usually just one operator with some help from the family. And they are producing pasture protein on a mix of leased and owned land. There were a few larger diversified operations, so crop livestock operations, and some of these the larger operations tended to either be fairly large and well-diversified operations, or they had on-farm slaughter facilities. So there was this small component of the whole that was pretty different from most of the other farms. The other thing, and all of the farms, regardless of scale or the type of diversification, produced multiple species. And so that species mix changed from farm to farm, but nearly all were raising some kind of ruminant on pasture. Another finding was 67% of these growers relied on off-farm income, which maybe sounds high, but as many of us here on this call probably know, that's pretty much the pattern for all of agriculture everywhere in the country. In fact, it's even higher than that. And then about 18% of this group consider themselves economically viable. So that's just a quick snapshot. Nicole, what would you add to that if you were trying to describe what it looks like in that whole community of pasture protein producers? Would you add anything?
Yeah, no, I think, even though this report came out a few years ago now, you're right, it is still pretty accurate. One thing, I guess, as we've gone through the pandemic, there have been some changes in terms of the market, and I've found that a lot of these small scale operations have benefited from sort of people's change in thinking of where their food's coming from, and having that accessibility. And so there's a lot of our friends and partners do still rely heavily on off-farm income, but it seems like there's been a shift in a lot of communities within our region, and so people are making those connections with these small farms and building community. And it seems like we're gaining more support, and so hopefully, or it's feeling hopeful that we can move towards having more operations be more economically viable. It is a slow process, but it's feeling hopeful around here.
Yeah, so maybe those last two bullets might be they might be a little bit more positive in this time. Yeah, great, thank you. And then the report identified some barriers to success for these producers, and a couple, and many of these from my perspective, I've worked more nationally with these issues, but they're pretty similar no matter where I've worked in the country with pasture protein producers. Producers would like a greater range and quality of processing, and also something that's popped up more recently in a big way here in this region is cold storage services. So this report found that right now the slaughter services capacity is adequate for the number of growers, but the growers would appreciate greater range and quality of processing. There's this gap between the cost of production and market prices is gotten better, as Nicole said, but it's still a challenge. And these producers report that it's pretty challenging to try to manage sales, marketing, distribution, and production. And they also identified a lack of awareness of or access to good business planning tools for their operations. And they also, processors were included in this research project, and what their main challenge is inconsistent throughput and seasonal bottlenecks. So just given the nature of pastured protein growers, there's a lot of demand at certain times of year, and then the processors are idle for other parts of the year. So want to add anything to that, Nicole? Just your own experience getting your animals processed?
Yeah, actually, yeah, Heather just wrote a comment in the chat box about in Oregon, it's hard for folks to find processors. And that was going to be sort of my comment. One thing that's changed from that report is because of COVID, we've had a lot of, we've had a few slaughterhouses shut down in our region, and it feels nearly impossible to be able to schedule dates as a small producer with slaughterhouses, and obviously that leads to all sorts of challenges. We end up having to drive much farther to find facilities that can take our animals, and it really makes it really when you start to plan for the year, do that production planning, you're really having to build all sorts of new connections within the region, outside of your region, to be able to continue to operate as normal, to be able to provide that product to your customers. And so, I was going to see if anyone else wanted to sort of speak to this, because it's become, it feels like it's a challenge that's unfortunately here to stay. With us.
Yeah, I could add a couple more things. Hudson Valley specific, but I'm guessing that they're actually more universal as well. My colleague, Dave Llewellyn, converged some livestock producers during COVID to talk about some fundamental bottlenecks and challenges. And a lot of the things that were in the report several years ago remain true. But a few other themes that came up were labor shortages, and also just lack of skilled labor, whether livestock farm hands or managers. We're having a lot of problems finding adequate livestock labor in the Hudson Valley, and are trying to think of solutions, whether that's recruiting out of state. It's hard to know what to do. And some other things that people flagged were customer education for cuts that they don't recognize or that may not look the same when they're frozen versus when they're fresh, because most of our producers are immediately freezing their meat. And along those lines, there's some desires for co-packing and for value-added products, because a lot of our producers have so many soup bones. They have a lot of bones, they have a lot of offal, and it's really hard to move it, but it has so much potential for products that people like, whether it's like tallow soap and candles or liverwurst or any other number of things, but we don't have enough co-packers in this region to use all the product. I think those were the main things that I wanted to add, but also happy. I saw some nods, so I'm under the guise that it's the same in the Midwest, perhaps, and on the West Coast too.
Yeah, and Jules put in the chat, same challenges in New Mexico, not just for livestock, but for value-added processing as well. Building out the infrastructure is cost prohibitive, even for the co-ops. Yeah, and then we had a question, what is meant by range of processing? I could answer based on my own experience, but we have two Kate or Nicole. Nicole, can you speak to that? And what does that mean by range of processing?
Well,
I think it's maybe kind of getting at what Kate just was saying, you know, this different products, but what's your thinking?
Yeah, I mean, so with at least, right, so in the Hudson Valley, I've found that a lot of slaughterhouses really, you know, they're also working to be profitable, and they want to sort of streamline, and a lot of places are mostly looking to process like beef and pork, or cattle and pigs, and it's become, while it's difficult to find spots for those critters, it's even harder to find slaughterhouses that are willing to take sheep, both mutton and lamb, goat, and then poultry. We don't have a lot of poultry processors in this region, and so it becomes, you know, it's one thing to process chickens, but then again, also for waterfowl. So that's it really limits what types of animals you can produce around here, because it's tough to find folks that will process them, and it sort of leads to it can lead to producers having to make those hard decisions as to change their systems, because they wouldn't be able to get that product to their customers. So Beth, did that answer your question?
Yeah, I did wonder if you meant that by species. And I've heard some of that before, like you said, ducks, even people who do poultry processing won't always do ducks because it's harder to get the feathers out. So, and if you have small numbers, like you could not take your, sheep and cattle with the same load or something like that. I don't know if you could do that anyway, but yeah,
it's tough. And it, as someone who's running a business, it's easy to see from the processor's perspective, they're looking for larger numbers of animals, the same type of animal, and for that consistent, for that consistency. And as a small producer, I can't provide that. I only am able to raise a small number of all these different species, and due to the seasonality of the work we do, it's only at a certain time of year that I can really provide a finished product. And so with that challenge, and with the fact that we have fewer processors nowadays, I have had to really consider, is it possible to change the way that we produce meat here on this farm? Can we sort of breed out of season so that we have animals ready to go at different times of the year when it's slower for the processors? Just because when it comes down to the bottleneck times of the year, I may not be the first customer they're looking to work with, because I can't provide them 50 steers to slaughter within a couple of months. I only have 5 usually. So it's been a challenge that I think has really been exacerbated through COVID, and it'll continue to be an interesting discussion, and see how it really shapes production in this area, and I guess across the country.
Yeah, great, thank you. I think we're out of time, but to end on a positive note, we're not 100% sure yet, but we're feeling pretty positive that we will be getting some funding to be able to address these barriers in the Hudson Valley in the coming years, in a kind of a coalition and create a network and develop some coalitions to really lean into some of these challenges and improve the situation here. So stay tuned, and we'll come back next year and speak about this again at the conference. Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate the conversation. Thanks, Kate, for jumping in and helping out some too.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.